Lyra had always known she was different, even before the doctors confirmed it. On her homeworld of Ashari Prime, life was carefully ordered. Every citizen was measured, recorded, and placed into society based on ability, contribution, and future value. For most Ashari, that future included children. Families were not only personal bonds, but social pillars. Generations worked together, passed knowledge down, and strengthened the combine. But Lyra had been labeled non-viable at maturity. The word followed her quietly through life. It was never spoken with cruelty, yet it shaped every interaction. Teachers praised her intelligence but never asked about her future lineage. Supervisors valued her precision but never suggested long-term leadership roles tied to family networks. She was useful, respected, and alone in a way that never fully healed. She learned early not to resent it. Resentment solved nothing. Instead, she focused on her work. As a xenobiological archivist aboard the orbital research station HFY, Lyra spent her days cataloging life forms from across known space. She studied how creatures survived hostile worlds, how evolution solved problems in strange and unexpected ways. There was comfort in patterns, in knowing that life always found a way, except it seemed in her. The irony did not escape her. When news arrived that humanity had made formal contact with the Combine, the station shifted overnight. Schedules were rewritten. Observation protocols expanded. Entire wings were prepared for the arrival of the new species. Humans. The preliminary reports confused Lyra, short-lived, physically fragile, emotionally expressive to a degree most Ashari found uncomfortable. Their biology was described as inefficient, redundant, and unstable. And yet, they had crossed interstellar space alone. They had done it without the genetic perfection programs the Combine relied on, without population controls refined over centuries, without discarding traits deemed unnecessary. That contradiction caught Lyra's attention. She was assigned to the Joint Medical Exchange Program as a data observer. It was a neutral role, meant to document human methodologies rather than participate. Still, she felt a quiet anticipation as the human delegation arrived. They were smaller than she expected. Softer. Their movements were less precise, their posture relaxed in a way that suggested confidence rather than discipline. They smiled often, an expression the Ashari had but rarely used without reason. One human stood out quickly. Dr. Elias Morno. He was introduced as a specialist in reproductive biology, genetics, and adaptive medicine. His voice was calm, his eyes curious rather than judgmental. When he spoke, he asked questions instead of making assumptions. That alone was unusual. During the first weeks, Lyra observed quietly as human doctors reviewed Ashari medical frameworks. They did not criticize them. Instead, they asked why certain standards existed, why certain outcomes were considered final. One day, during a routine review of archived cases, Elias paused longer than necessary at Lyra's file. She noticed immediately. "Is there an error?" she asked, her tone professional. "No," he said slowly. "I just want to understand something." She had heard that before. "My condition is documented," she replied. "It is congenital, non-reversible." "That's the conclusion," Elias said. "I'm asking how it was reached." The question unsettled her more than she expected. She explained the process. Genetic scans, developmental markers, predictive modeling. The same standards applied to millions of Ashari across generations. The same results every time. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back slightly, thinking. "May I review the raw data?" he asked. Lyra hesitated. "That information is not classified, but it is personal." He nodded immediately. "Only if you're comfortable, no pressure." She studied him, searching for hidden motives. There were none she could detect, only curiosity. She authorized the access. The next few days passed quietly until Elias requested a private consultation, not a medical exam, just a discussion. When she arrived, she found him surrounded by holographic projections of Ashari cellular structures. "I think your people asked the wrong question," he said. Her mandibles tightened slightly, an Ashari sign of confusion. "Explain." "You asked whether your system could initiate reproduction under ideal conditions," he said. "When it didn't, you labeled it infertile." "That is correct." "What if it was never meant to work under ideal conditions?" he asked. The idea sounded illogical. He continued. "Human biology is messy, redundant. Sometimes systems stay inactive unless they're stressed, supported, or challenged in specific ways. We don't assume something is broken just because it doesn't work on schedule. Lyra felt something shift inside her, not hope exactly, but attention. You believe my biology is incomplete, she said. No, Elias replied. I think it's waiting. The words echoed longer than they should have. She agreed to further analysis, still convinced it would lead nowhere. Yet part of her, a part she had trained herself to silence, felt something dangerously close to anticipation. The scans began as standard procedures. Elias worked alongside Ashari technicians, careful not to interfere with established protocols. But he added something new, comparative modeling using human adaptive frameworks. The results were subtle. No dramatic changes, no immediate reversals. But Elias noticed patterns others had ignored. Dormant signaling pathways, suppressed responses that did not indicate damage, only inactivity, systems that had never been encouraged to engage. It's like a door no one ever tried to open, he said quietly. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt fear, not of disappointment but of possibility. The more they studied, the more questions arose. Why had Ashari evolution favored strict optimization? Why remove redundancy entirely? Why assume stability was superior to flexibility? Human answers were simple. Because perfection breaks easily, Elias said. The data suggested that with external support, not genetic alteration, not invasive correction, but adaptive assistance, her body might respond differently. It was not a cure, it was an invitation. Lyra knew the council would never approve it. She also knew she would volunteer anyway. That night, alone in her quarters, she stared at the city lights of Ashari Prime through the station viewport. For years, she had accepted her place in society with quiet dignity. She had told herself that meaning did not require motherhood. That was still true. But meaning, she realized, could include choice, and for the first time, someone had offered her one. Far across the station, Elias recorded his notes carefully. Humans had learned long ago that life was stubborn, unpredictable, and full of exceptions. The galaxy was about to learn the same lesson, and neither of them yet understood how much it would change everything. Lyra did not sleep well after agreeing to continue the study. Her mind kept returning to Elias' words, waiting. The idea felt dangerous. Hope was not something Ashari were trained to carry when evidence said otherwise. Hope led to instability, to disappointment, to social disruption. From childhood, she had learned to accept conclusions early and move forward without questioning them. Yet now, her thoughts refused to stay quiet. The next cycle began with controlled tests. Nothing invasive. No alteration of her genetic structure. Elias insisted on that point repeatedly. He explained that humans had learned, often the hard way, that forcing biology to obey usually caused more damage than patience ever could. Instead, they focused on support systems. Human-designed bioscaffolds were introduced into the simulations first. These systems did not replace Ashari biology. They responded to it, adjusted to it, and withdrew when not needed. Elias described them as listening tools. To the Ashari technicians, this approach seemed inefficient. Why allow uncertainty? One of them asked. Because certainty can blind you, Elias answered calmly. Lyra observed everything closely. She noted how Elias never treated her as a broken subject. He spoke to her directly, asked for her input, explained every step without simplifying it unnecessarily. That alone set him apart from most Ashari specialists she had encountered. When the first real test began, she felt no immediate difference. No pain, no sensation at all. For a moment, disappointment threatened to rise, but she pushed it down. This was not a miracle process. Elias had been clear about that. Change, if it came, would be slow. Hours later, as the data streamed in, one of the monitors shifted slightly. A signal appeared where none had existed before. It was faint, almost dismissible, but it was there. Elias leaned closer, his expression focused. That pathway hasn't activated in your species' recorded history, he said. The room grew quiet. The Ashari technicians exchanged uneasy looks. One of them began recalibrating the sensors, convinced it must be an error. It was not. Over the next several cycles, similar signals appeared again and again, always weak, always temporary, but increasingly frequent. Lyra felt nothing physically, yet something inside her perception changed. For the first time, her body was not silent to her own awareness. There was no pain, no discomfort, only a subtle sense of internal alignment, as if systems long ignored were remembering their purpose. When the council learned of the preliminary results, they summoned Elias immediately. T. Lyra was not invited. She waited in the observation chamber, watching the station traffic drift past the viewport. Her hands were steady, but her thoughts were not. She had known resistance would come. The Combine valued stability above all else. Elias returned later than expected. "They are concerned," he said carefully. "That was inevitable," T. Lyra replied. "They're not questioning the data," he continued. "They're questioning the implications." That worried her more. The council feared disruption. If infertility was not permanent, then centuries of social structure rested on a false assumption. Entire policies would need reevaluation. Roles assigned at maturity would lose their meaning, and humanity was at the center of it. "The project will continue," Elias said, "but under restrictions." "What kind of restrictions?" T. Lyra asked. "Limited scope, no public release, no expansion to other subjects." She understood immediately. They wanted control. Despite the limits, the work continued. Elias adjusted the bioscaffolds, refining them based on her responses. He compared her data to human cases of delayed or stress-activated fertility. Patterns emerged that felt almost obvious in hindsight. Ashari evolution had favored efficiency to such a degree that adaptability had been sacrificed. Systems either worked perfectly or not at all. There was no allowance for variation. Humans were the opposite. Their biology was full of backups, workarounds, and delayed responses. They survived not because they were optimized, but because they were flexible. During one session, Elias spoke without looking up from the display. "Humans expect things to break," he said. "So we build systems that can fail and still recover." "That seems inefficient," T. Lyra replied. He smiled slightly. "It is, and it keeps us alive." As the cycles passed, her data crossed a threshold no Ashari had ever reached. The classification algorithms flagged her status as indeterminate. That single word caused more concern than any failure ever had. Indeterminate meant unknown. Unknown meant uncontrollable. The council issued another order. Elias was to prepare for departure within a standard cycle. The exchange program would conclude early. When T. Lyra heard, something inside her hardened. She requested permission to address the council herself. The request was denied. That night, she reviewed the data alone. She did not need Elias to tell her what it meant. Her body was responding. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. If the project ended now, the progress might stop. Or worse, it might never be studied again. She made a decision that would have once terrified her. She transmitted her full medical record, raw and unfiltered, to the Central Scientific Archive, marking it as open access research. It was a violation of protocol, but not of law. By the time the council reacted, the data had already been downloaded by thousands of researchers across the Combine. Elias found out hours later. "They'll be furious," he said. "They already are," T. Lyra replied calmly. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Humans would have done the same." The council convened an emergency session. Public interest surged. For the first time, Ashari citizens openly discussed infertility not as a closed fate, but as a question. The project was no longer just about T. Lyra. Under pressure, the council delayed Elias' departure. They demanded proof, certainty, guarantees. Elias offered none. "Life doesn't come with guarantees," he said during the hearing. "Only chances." More tests followed. More data. T. Lyra's biological signals stabilized. What had once been faint became consistent. What had been dormant became responsive. She felt changes now. Not dramatic, not painful, just an awareness of balance she had never known. One cycle, as she reviewed the latest results, the confirmation arrived. Her status updated automatically. No longer non-viable, no longer indeterminate, simply viable. The word sat quietly on the screen, unremarkable in appearance, yet heavy with meaning. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, she felt nothing but stillness. Then something else followed, not celebration, not disbelief, relief. The council did not announce the result publicly, not yet, but the damage to their certainty was already done. Across the Combine, other Ashari began asking questions, some with curiosity, some with fear. Some with hope they had buried long ago. Elias began preparing to leave again, this time by choice. "You don't have to stay," T. Lyra said. He shook his head. "I don't need to, you've already shown them." As the station lights dimmed into artificial night, T. Lyra stood once more at the viewport. The future no longer felt like a closed path. It felt wide, uncertain, and alive. And the galaxy, quietly and without realizing it yet, was beginning to change. The confirmation changed everything, even though it was not announced. Lyra felt it first in the way people looked at her. Conversations paused when she entered a room. Messages arrived from researchers she had never met. Some were respectful, some were careful. A few were afraid. Fear was the most telling. For generations, infertility among the Ashari had been treated as a closed subject. It was accepted, recorded, and moved past. Entire systems had been built around that certainty. Now that certainty had cracked and the fracture was spreading. The Council tried to slow it down. They released controlled statements emphasizing that Lyra's case was unique, an anomaly, not a pattern. They warned against emotional reactions and reminded citizens that social stability mattered more than individual exceptions. But data does not listen to speeches. Across the Combine, researchers began re-examining old records. Cases once dismissed as permanent failure were reviewed with new eyes. Human adaptive models were quietly integrated into simulations. The results were inconsistent, unpredictable, and deeply unsettling. Some systems responded, some did not. But enough did to make silence impossible. Elias remained on the station longer than planned, though his official status was unclear. He was no longer a simple exchange specialist. To some, he was a valuable consultant. To others, a dangerous influence. He was aware of both. "You're becoming a symbol," he told Lyra one cycle as they reviewed incoming data together. "I never wanted that," she replied. "No one who changes things ever does," he said. The Council summoned them both soon after. This time, Lyra was not excluded. The chamber was large, designed to impress and intimidate. Councilors sat elevated, their expressions carefully neutral. The atmosphere was calm on the surface, but tension ran beneath it. They spoke first to Elias. "You have introduced instability," one councilor said. "Whether intentional or not," Elias nodded. "That happens when assumptions are challenged." "Your methods lack predictability," another said. "So does life," Elias replied evenly. Then they turned to Lyra. "You have violated protocol," the lead counselor said. "You released sensitive data without authorization." "I released my own data," Lyra said, "which I am legally permitted to do." Silence followed. "You have changed how our people see themselves," the counselor continued. "Do you understand the consequences?" Lyra did not hesitate. "Yes." "And you proceeded anyway?" "Yes." There was no anger in her voice, only certainty. The council recessed without issuing a ruling. That alone was alarming. Outside the chamber, Elias exhaled slowly. "They're divided," he said. "That's worse than unified opposition." "Division allows change," Lyra replied. "Or conflict," he said. The first protest occurred on Ashari Prime days later. It was small, peaceful. Formerly infertile citizens gathered in a public forum, holding data displays instead of signs. They asked for research access, for transparency, for permission to hope. Security forces observed but did not intervene. More gatherings followed. The council issued restrictions on further human involvement, citing internal review. Elias was officially ordered to return to human space within a cycle. This time, he did not argue. "You've already done enough," Lyra said quietly when he told her. He smiled, tired but genuine. "Humans are good at starting fires. You're the one who has to tend it." Before he left, he gave her full access to the human adaptive medical framework, not as a gift but as shared knowledge. "No ownership," he said, "just questions." After his departure, the pressure increased. Certain council factions pushed for containment. They proposed classifying restored fertility as a medical rarity, subject to strict licensing. They argued that uncontrolled expansion would destabilize population planning and resource allocation. Others argued back, quietly at first, then openly. The Combine had always believed control created safety. But now, evidence suggested flexibility created survival. Lyra found herself called to speak again and again. Research forums, ethics panels, cultural assemblies, she never dramatized her experience. She presented facts, data, calm observations. She spoke of how it felt to be defined by absence. She spoke of how it felt to be seen as complete only after change. Her words reached places policy never could. Then came the breakthrough that could not be hidden. A second Ashari case achieved viability. Then a third, not all succeeded. Some systems remained inactive. That truth was acknowledged openly. Humanity had never promised certainty, only possibility. The council could no longer deny the pattern. Emergency legislation was proposed. Human methods would be restricted to experimental status only. T-Lyra would be reassigned away from public engagement. The vote was close. It failed by a narrow margin. For the first time in recorded Combine history, a council decision was overturned by internal dissent supported by public data pressure. That night, T-Lyra stood alone again at the viewport, watching ships move through the darkness. She felt no triumph, only weight. Change was never clean. Messages arrived from other species within the Combine. Some had similar conditions, some had different ones entirely. All asked the same question: could this help us too? The Council authorized a limited interspecies research initiative. Humanity was invited back officially this time. Elias returned weeks later, surprised and visibly relieved. "They finally asked," he said. "They were forced to," T-Lyra replied. Together they watched the first results extend beyond Ashari biology. Different species, different systems, same principle, support instead of force, adaptation instead of correction. The galaxy began to shift its view of humans. Not as conquerors, not as innovators alone, but as questioners. A species that survived because it never assumed it had reached perfection. Opposition did not vanish. Some Ashari feared loss of identity, others feared uncontrolled growth. Those debates continued, sometimes heated, sometimes painful. But the door was open now, and doors once opened are hard to close. Late one cycle, T-Lyra received a private medical update. She read it slowly twice, then a third time. The data was clear. Her body was not only viable, it was progressing naturally. She sat down, steadying herself. There was no dramatic reaction, just quiet understanding. She informed Elias later. He did not celebrate loudly, he simply nodded. "That's good," he said, "for you." For us, she corrected, across the Combine, life was being redefined. Not rewritten, but expanded. And humanity, once dismissed as fragile and inefficient, had become something unexpected. A catalyst, the most dangerous thing in any civilization. Because once people learn that limits can be questioned, they never stop asking why. Change did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly, the way real change often does. The research stations grew busier. Data flowed faster than policy could follow. Committees formed and dissolved. Arguments continued in public forums and private chambers alike. Some voices were hopeful, some were afraid, many were both. T-Lyra moved through it all with steady calm. Her body continued to change, slowly and naturally. There was no sudden transformation, no dramatic moment that could be pointed to as the beginning. It felt more like a long conversation her biology had finally decided to join. Medical confirmations followed careful observation. Progression was stable. Support systems were gradually reduced as her own processes took over. Elias insisted on that part. "Support should step back when it's no longer needed," he said. "Otherwise it becomes control." She understood now why humans valued that idea so deeply. The council remained divided, but resistance weakened as results spread. The more people saw that the process did not promise miracles, only chances, the less threatening it seemed. Not everyone succeeded. That truth mattered. It kept hope grounded in reality. What could no longer be denied was this: the future was no longer fixed. T-Lyra was invited to step away from public roles as her condition advanced. Officially, it was for her well-being. Unofficially, it allowed society to adjust without her presence becoming overwhelming. She accepted without argument. For the first time in her life, she chose rest. Her quarters were relocated to a quieter habitat ring with wider views of open space. The lights there were softer, the noise lower. She spent long hours simply observing the stars, thinking about the countless forms of life she had studied and how many assumptions she had once accepted without question. Elias visited when he could. Sometimes they spoke about research. Other times they sat in silence, watching distant suns burn quietly. "You know," he said once, "humans used to think space would make us feel small." "Did it?" she asked. "It made us feel responsible," he replied. "If life is this rare, then every form of it matters." Her progression reached a point where the confirmation could no longer be delayed. The council requested a private briefing. T-Lyra stood before them again, not as a symbol this time, but as a simple fact. The medical officer spoke first. "Your condition has reached full biological confirmation." The words were precise, neutral, yet they carried the weight of centuries. The council acknowledged it without ceremony. No applause, no public announcement, just a quiet update to the records. But that update echoed farther than any speech ever could. Across the Combine, policies began to change. Slowly, carefully. Infertility was no longer listed as permanent by default. Research access expanded. Social roles were revised to allow future reassessment. Choice entered the system, and choice, once allowed, reshapes everything. Lyra's days became simpler. She learned the rhythms of her changing body, guided by careful medical oversight. There was no fear in it, only attentiveness. She did not romanticize the process. She treated it with the same respect she gave all biological systems. Life was work, life was patience. Elias prepared to return to human space permanently. His role here was complete. Before he left, he met Lyra one last time. "You'll be fine without me," he said. She tilted her head slightly in a Shari expression of agreement. "We already were," he smiled. "That's the best outcome." When he departed, there was no sense of loss, only gratitude. Time passed. The galaxy continued to adapt. Other species joined the initiative, some with success, some without. Humanity never claimed credit. They published openly, shared failures as readily as successes, and reminded everyone that their methods were not answers, only tools. That humility earned more trust than any victory ever could. The moment Lyra had once imagined with fear came without drama. A simple medical confirmation, a steady tone, no alarms. She sat quietly afterward, hands resting against herself, feeling something she had never felt before. Not excitement, not disbelief, connection. She thought of the Ashari belief that lineage was legacy, that worth flowed forward through generations. For years, she had believed she stood outside that current. She understood now that legacy was not about continuation alone. It was about change. As her time approached, preparations were made with careful respect. Ashari medical teams worked alongside human advisors, not because they were needed, but because collaboration had become the new standard. When the moment arrived, it was calm. No crowd, no announcement, just life continuing its oldest pattern in a new way. Later, when it was over and quiet returned, Lyra held the future gently and without fear. There were no words for what she felt. No cultural framework fully captured it, so she did not try. She simply existed in the moment. News spread as it always does, not as a headline. Not as a spectacle, as confirmation. The first of a new generation born not from perfection but from cooperation. The Council issued a final statement weeks later, brief, measured. They acknowledged humanity's contribution. They acknowledged error, not failure but assumption. That alone was historic. Lyra withdrew from public life entirely after that. Others took up the work. Others spoke. Others argued and refined and improved. That was how systems stayed alive. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, she looked out at the stars again. She thought of humans on their small blue world, fragile and flawed, carrying their questions into the dark. They had never tried to control the galaxy. They had only asked it to listen. And in doing so, they reminded everyone of something long forgotten. Life does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be given the chance to try.